Within the Milan arena, a peculiar shift occurred. It wasn't a slip, nor an error, but something far more subtle. The judges registered it first, then the broadcast booth fell silent, and then the spectators sensed it. For in the most harrowing 4 minutes in all of figure skating, Alisa Lou was glowing. It was no performance for the cameras. It was an authentic smile, the kind that blooms from pure enjoyment. This was the most baffling element. Every other competitor's face was a mask of terror. Finals are not meant to be celebrations of joy. They are battlegrounds for survival. So how did this woman, who skated with the peacefulness of someone who had already lost, manage to rewrite the entire evening? The quiet that descended upon the arena that night was almost a physical weight. Not loud, not theatrical, just dense. It was the sort of profound stillness that envelops a crowd of thousands when they collectively anticipate a moment of great significance. The scene was Milan, in February of 2026. The Olympic women's figure skating final was down to its last competitors. Throughout the evening, the stadium had already witnessed breathtaking performances, including quadruple jumps and spins of near-flawless execution. Routines had been delivered with surgical accuracy, but the feeling surrounding this final skater was entirely different. Alisa glided onto the ice with a measured, almost nonchalant air, as if it were a casual practice session instead of the Olympic final. Her entire demeanor defied the crushing tension in the building. Skaters in her position usually reveal a visible burden on their shoulders. You notice it in the sharp gasp for air before the music begins, the weight of years, sometimes a whole life, compressed into 4 minutes. Yet Alisa appeared composed, almost entertained. A television announcer noted it in a hushed tone just before her program started. "Look at her expression," he remarked. "She is absolutely serene." Serenity was astonishing, because the pressure was immense. An American woman had not claimed Olympic gold in the sport since 2002. 24 years. A whole generation of skaters had chased that dream and fallen short. The pressure from that long championship drought had become a ghostly adversary on the ice. It was a weight that every American Olympian had to carry, but Alisa Lou seemed to be shouldering nothing at all. As the opening melody drifted through the arena, she pushed off with a liquid, effortless grace. The first few seconds of a performance are profoundly revealing. You can detect the slightest hesitation, the tremors of anxiety, the guardedness of an athlete skating simply to avoid mistakes. But there was nothing guarded about Alisa's movements. They were utterly liberated. The edges of her blades carved the ice with a cadence that felt more like a dance than a competition. The difference was faint, at first. The initial jump, a triple combination, arrived quickly, a sequence honed by thousands of repetitions in training. Her landing was impeccable. The audience offered polite applause. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until the moment that followed. Rather than transitioning into the next element with the rigid intensity typical of most skaters, Alisa let the motion linger. She extended her glide, her arms fluid, her posture at ease. She created a pause, a breath. She seemed less like a person executing choreography and more like someone deeply absorbed in the music. A second jump came, and another flawless landing. By now, the technical judges at rinkside were already inputting their scores. In the Olympics, every landing is critical. It's not just about completing the jump, but about the seamlessness of the exit. It's a combination of flow, speed, and mastery. And Alisa's landings possess that most coveted of qualities, momentum. Each jump propelled her forward without pause. There was no sign of exertion, no hurried adjustment. The routine was gathering force. A spin, a footwork sequence, another clean triple jump. But the spectators were now noticing something beyond her technical mastery. It was her face. Most Olympians adopt what is known as a performance face. Focused, detached, a shield to hide the nerves. Alisa wore no such shield. At one point, after landing a jump just slightly askew, a quick playful look flashed across her face, a tiny, almost imperceptible whoops. The cameras caught it, and the commentators chuckled not because of the imperfection, but because she had reacted like a person, not a perfect machine. At the Olympic level, that is almost unheard of. Competitors are drilled to conceal all emotion. Errors are meant to be instantly swallowed by discipline. But Alisa's brief show of humanity vanished as she flowed into the next movement, and the audience roared its approval. The sound of the applause intensified. There was a lightness to her program that the others had lacked, something less strained and more vibrant. As her skate approached its midpoint, the very pulse of the arena started to shift. You could hear the change in the crowd's response. The tense, anxious silence that usually follows a major jump, that suspended moment where thousands hold their breath, was gone. Instead of waiting to see if she would fall, the audience began to respond immediately, cheering in the middle of her performance, clapping between her moves as the energy surged, because the entire arena was realizing they were part of something extraordinary. Alisa Liu's performance wasn't a defense of her points. She was pure joy, a celebration of the moment in a sport founded on crushing pressure, and her freedom on the ice felt like an act of defiance. As her music swelled to its peak, the silence in the stadium shattered, replaced by a roaring, living entity. Yet, the most profound reactions weren't erupting from the stands. They were unfolding backstage, where her rivals, glued to a monitor, witnessed something the audience couldn't yet grasp. The crowd was only just beginning to grasp that Alisa Liu had thrown caution to the wind. She wasn't aiming for safety. She absolutely was not performing out of fear. And that fearlessness, more than any jump, was the true menace on the ice. In the wings, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the electric energy filling the arena. While television cameras bathed Alisa Liu in the brilliant glow of the spotlight, a silent drama was playing out just beyond the curtain. A small group of finalists had gathered around the live feed, their own battles concluded. It's a ritual among skaters to watch a rival's final skate not for pleasure, because there is rarely any, but because the entire scoreboard hangs in the balance. Each successful landing rewrites the arithmetic of the competition. Each leap recalibrates the immense pressure, and what they were witnessing was anything but typical. The reason wasn't that Alisa was executing the night's most difficult routine. She was not. Other competitors had risked quadruple jumps earlier, maneuvers with higher base scores, greater danger, and the promise of a monumental reward. But they also came with another companion, sheer terror. The brutality of a quadruple jump is undeniable. The planet's finest skaters fail them with regularity, meaning every attempt is steeped in tension. Muscles constrict. The window for perfect timing shrinks to nothing. A single flicker of hesitation, and the whole element disintegrates. That strain had been a palpable force throughout the finals. Earlier that night, athlete after athlete had emerged onto the ice, their faces like frozen masks of concentration. One skater stood motionless at center ice for nearly 30 seconds before her music began, taking measured breaths and glaring at the rink, while another frantically shook her hands, trying to cast out the nerves before her first jump. None of this was out of the ordinary. This is what Olympic finals do to people. The competition condenses a lifetime of training into 4 minutes. Thousands upon thousands of hours, a sacrificed childhood, the expectations of a family, the hope of a nation, all of it resting on a razor's edge of steel. That sort of burden fundamentally changes how a person moves. You notice it in their carriage, in the subtle clenching of their shoulders before a launch, in the extra layer of caution that coats their every glide. Because at the Olympic Games, a misstep doesn't just deduct points, it becomes a national headline. The skaters waiting backstage knew that weight intimately. For most, this single moment was the culmination of their entire existence. Some began their journey as 5-year-olds, long before they could comprehend the meaning of competition, long before they understood the crushing power of pressure. By the time they ascended to this stage, the sport had forged their lives around one solitary goal: win, or at the very least, survive without a single error. But as they watched Alisa Liu on the monitor, there was an alien quality to her motion. One rival reportedly drew inches from the screen as Alisa completed another flawless jump. The shock wasn't the jump itself, but her exit from it. There was no wobble, no fight for balance, just pure, uninterrupted velocity carried across the ice. It was the very embodiment of what coaches call flow. This is a detail more critical than most viewers would ever imagine, because anxiety compels skaters to clench their bodies in midair. Even on a clean landing, the result is rigidity. All momentum vanishes. The performance turns mechanical. But Alisa's landings were fluid, each one seamlessly transitioning into the next. The implication was unmistakable. She was skating without tension. She was skating free, and a free skater is a lethal adversary, for when fear evaporates, consistency soars. A broadcaster captured the phenomenon with simple words later that night. She doesn't look like she's protecting anything. The observation hung in the air, potent and true. Because protecting something is the default state of an Olympian defending a ranking, a reputation, a lifetime of sacrifice. Yet Alisa Liu had already undergone an ordeal few contenders ever face. She had already abandoned the sport entirely. Back in 2022, just after the Beijing Winter Olympics, Alisa delivered a decision that stunned the entire sport. At 16 years old, an age when many athletes are just entering their golden years, she announced her retirement. Just like that, it was over. No grand farewell tour, no gentle easing away. She was gone. As she would later explain, the joy had simply died. Years of relentless competition had twisted the sport into a heavy, unrecognizable thing. An athlete at that breaking point faces a stark choice, a fundamental crossroads with only two paths forward: endure the agony or walk away entirely. Alisa walked away, triggering a 2-year chapter in her life that was utterly unprecedented. For what felt like the first time since she was a child, her entire existence no longer orbited the ice. Gone was the brutal daily training. Gone were the high-stakes competitions every few weeks. There were no judges' scores, only the rhythm of a normal life attending college lectures, forging friendships, traveling the world, all the precious moments elite athletes sacrifice during their peak years. Those 2 years away forged something new within her, because when Alisa made her comeback in 2024, her reason for skating had been reborn. She was no longer a prisoner to the world's expectations. She had already broken free of them once. And that profound change was a quiet, powerful force, radiating from her on the ice in Milan. As her rivals took to the ice, you could see the crushing weight of their sacrifices, the burden of a lifetime dedicated to reaching the Olympics. But Alisa Lou moved like a woman with absolutely nothing to prove. Backstage, the other competitors, their eyes glued to the monitors, could feel that shift in the air, because an athlete can read the soul of another competitor far better than any spectator. They have an intimate knowledge of what terror looks like. They understand how the vice grip of pressure contorts the body. And they could all see that Alisa Lou was skating without a trace of either. A current of pure freedom flowed through her, a fact that sent a wave of deep unease through her competition. When a skater with that kind of liberation starts hitting every single jump, they transform into an unstoppable force. And as her program neared its crescendo, a chilling realization began to dawn backstage. This was not shaping up to be just another flawless Olympic performance. This was something else entirely, a phenomenon none of them could have ever anticipated. Because the most formidable opponent in a final isn't always the one attempting the riskiest moves. Sometimes, it's the one who has forgotten how to be afraid. The genesis of that stunning Olympic performance in Milan didn't happen in the arena. Its true origin story began 2 years prior, a quiet moment witnessed by almost no one in that roaring crowd. In early 2024, Alisa Lou glided onto the ice of a public rink in California, a place she hadn't been in a very long time. There were no television cameras, no stern Federation officials, no crushing weight of Olympic dreams. There was only a hushed rink, the gentle hiss of blades carving into ice, and a handful of hobbyists making slow loops beneath the glow of fluorescent lights. In that instant, Alisa Lou wasn't a contender for an Olympic medal. She wasn't even on the competitive circuit. For almost 2 years, she had become a ghost in the world of elite sports, a former prodigy who had simply vanished into thin air. Her retirement announcement in 2022 had sent shockwaves through the skating community. Most Olympians reach their zenith in their 20s, with some peaking even later. But Alisa hung up her skates at 16, an age when many of her peers were just making their debut in the senior leagues. For those on the outside looking in, her choice was bewildering. Why would anyone quit at the very peak of their ascent? But those immersed in the world of figure skating understood a brutal truth that the average fan rarely sees. Prodigies are forged in a crucible of immense pressure. From the moment Alisa erupted onto the national stage, a narrative of expectation began to coil around her. At just 13 years old, she seized the title of the youngest U.S. national champion in decades, a victory that irrevocably altered the course of her life. In a flash, she was no longer just another promising young skater. She was anointed the very future of American figure skating. The media descended. Sponsorship deals poured in. Every single competition morphed into a referendum on her potential, a test of whether she could bear the weight of a nation's hopes on her shoulders. And that kind of expectation is a silent, creeping force, accumulating day after day, season after relentless season. Eventually, the very act of skating begins to feel less like a passion and more like a heavy, unending duty. By the time Alisa took the ice at the Beijing Winter Olympics in 2022, her technical prowess placed her among the very best skaters in the United States. Yet the reality of that experience was a world away from the spectacle viewers saw on their television screens. In interviews that came later, she articulated it with devastating simplicity. It wasn't the skating she had come to loathe, it was the machine that skating had become. The suffocating schedules, the relentless pressure, the constant judgment, the scores that could build or shatter a life's work in a matter of seconds. As soon as the Olympic season drew to a close, She made a decision that left coaches, commentators, and her entire fanbase utterly stunned. She simply walked away. There was no talk of a future return date, no hint that she might one day reconsider. She just stepped completely outside the world of elite athletics. For a time, skating was erased from her life. She became a college student. She dove into psychology, immersing herself in experiences she'd never had time for while growing up in the insulated world of high-level training. Late-night discussions with classmates, the pulse of campus life, spontaneous travel, ordinary days. And the remarkable thing about an ordinary life is its power to reshape your entire point of view. When an athlete's entire life is spent within the confines of a competitive system, their sport inevitably consumes their identity. Leaving that system can be profoundly disorienting, but it also creates a vital space, a distance from the expectations. A distance from the pressure. A distance from that ceaseless, nagging voice demanding to know if every single moment on the ice is good enough. That was the distance Alisa Lou finally found during her 2 years away. And so, when she materialized at an obscure public rink in 2024, no one could have known the sheer gravity of that moment, for she had not come to train. She had come to find out if the feeling itself had survived. Not for points, not for glory, but for the raw, elemental sensation of a blade on ice. She drifted at first, carving simple, quiet arcs into the surface, avoiding anything difficult, forgoing any leaps. The few others around her paid no mind. In their eyes, she was simply another skater lost in the solitude of a winter afternoon. But then, an old ghost stirred within her. The cadence, the surge of velocity, that electric spark when motion and melody perfectly align in the soul. This wasn't the crushing weight she remembered from her past. This was bliss. That single moment was a cataclysm, because skating was suddenly no longer the demon she had run from. It had become a sanctuary she could return to. While the distinction appears minor, psychologically it detonates everything. When a champion returns to their arena by choice, not by command, their entire relationship with the fight is reborn. The fear loses its power. The burden of expectation crumbles to dust. The art becomes theirs once more. After that internal revolution, the very notion of competing felt like a possibility again. Not a requirement, just a whisper of an idea. Through early 2024, Alisa's visits to the ice grew more frequent, still lacking the punishing structure of an elite regimen, but it was enough to reveal a stunning truth. Her body had not forgotten. All those years of sacrifice do not simply vanish. The muscle memory was there, buried deep within her nerves, waiting to be awakened. The jumps came back. The triples bloomed first, then the intricate combinations. And soon, the very heartbeat of competitive skating was pulsing through her again. The friends and mentors who witnessed her skate again saw something utterly new. She seemed lighter, unbound, her expression pouring from her movements. The difference wasn't a matter of skill, it was a matter of spirit. The suffocating pressure that had once been her shadow was gone, and that transformation would become the sharpest edge she carried into the Olympic Games. Because when she finally stepped back into the international spotlight, Alisa Lou wasn't skating for anyone else's approval. She wasn't on a quest for vindication. She was skating for the love of skating itself, which meant that when she finally stood upon the Olympic stage in Milan, she possessed something no amount of training can ever bestow. She possessed freedom, and in a sport forged in pressure, freedom is the most unpredictable weapon of all. By the time Alisa Lou's symphony on ice reached its crescendo in Milan, a silent alchemy was already transforming the arena. It started as a charge in the air, a current that sweeps through a crowd before they even know they are holding their breath. An Olympic audience is a congregation of experts. Most of the souls watching that night were seasoned disciples of the sport, with years, even decades of devotion. They could read the story of a performance in its very pulse. They recognized the anatomy of tension, the precise point of climax, and they sensed this routine was building toward a moment of legend. The first half of Alisa's program had been a study in perfection. Every jump immaculate, every transition a seamless breath. Beside the ice, judges were silently etching scores while commentators translated the technical brilliance for millions watching from afar. But inside that stadium, something far more primal was taking hold. An entire arena of people was leaning in, for they knew the second half of a program is where the war is truly waged. It's where fatigue poisons the muscles, and timing becomes a fragile thread. This is where the greatest athletes can lose their nerve, where landings betray them as exhaustion lays its siege. It is the reason the most treacherous leaps are loaded at the start. It is the safe path, the path of mitigating disaster. But Alisa Lou was not skating a safe path. She launched into the program's final act with the same ferocious tempo she had begun with. Not a flicker of tension, not a hint of reservation, just pure, untamed motion. The next jump, a triple Lutz combination loomed. It was a technical beast, but well within her power if she met it with absolute conviction. She tore into the air with breathtaking precision, a tight, controlled spiral, and landed without a flaw. But the true miracle was not the jump itself. It was the aftermath. There was none of the rigid correction athletes use to wrestle a landing into submission. Alysa simply melted into the next sequence, sacrificing none of her velocity. That single detail is everything, for it is what judges call flow, a continuous momentum, a sign of total and absolute command that exists beyond the jump. And Alysa's momentum was relentless. A collective gasp rippled through the spectators, a sound that started small but was quickly growing. The announcers felt it too, one of them murmuring, almost in awe, "She isn't losing steam, she's accelerating." It was a violation of the sport's unwritten laws. At this stage, Olympians are meant to conserve energy, to guard what little remains for the final push. But Alisa Lou looked as if she was falling deeper in love with the music with every passing moment. Her blades carved deeper into the ice, each stroke a statement, her footwork accelerating into a dizzying rhythmic blur. Then she began to spin, a perfectly centered vortex of grace, gathering speed until her blades etched a flawless circle into the rink's surface. As she broke from it, the roar from the stands swelled, a wave of sound gaining power. In that moment, the audience grasped a new reality. This was more than just a flawless routine. It was transforming into a masterpiece, and masterpieces have a way of swaying judges. Scoring in figure skating is a science, to be sure, but it is also an art, a realm of the intangible. They are called the performance components, the soul of the skate, its interpretation, the skater's presence, the seamless bond with the music, the silent conversation with every person watching. Alisa Lou was inhabiting every single one. Another leap was imminent. A triple flip, nailed, again. Her landing threw a delicate plume of ice into the air as she surged across the rink, a flash of motion. By now, the technical judges knew a profound truth. If she could execute the last few elements without error, her score would soar into a stratosphere where gold medals are born. But the arena was not privy to this secret. The crowd was simply reacting to what their eyes beheld, and they were witnessing a skater who seemed utterly at peace in the most high-stakes environment imaginable. Behind the scenes, the other athletes huddled around the monitor had fallen unnervingly silent, their earlier chatter replaced by a tense stillness. Some had already skated their final programs. Others were still frantically running numbers, trying to map out how the scores might settle into the final rankings. But those mental calculations were turning grim, shadowed by the undeniable fact that Alisa Lou was displaying no vulnerability, not even a hint of a crack in her armor. Not one uncertain landing, not a single misstep, not a trace of the crushing pressure. The final jump loomed one last precipice where a dream could be realized or shattered. Even the greatest champions can falter in the dying seconds of a program, betrayed by exhaustion or a flicker of overconfidence. It only takes a single, minuscule error. A collective breath was held. Alisa launched into the jump with breathtaking speed, the rotation a lightning-fast spiral. She touched down perfectly. And this time, the sound that ripped through the arena was not mere applause. It was an explosion of pure, unadulterated awe. It was the sound of thousands of hearts realizing the same thing at the exact same instant. This program was a triumph. Yet Alisa Lou offered no sign of celebration. No arms flung to the sky. No dramatic coasting to a halt. She simply flowed into the program's final choreography, maintaining the same effortless cadence that had defined her performance from the very first note. The music swelled to its crescendo. Her movements became a symphony of motion, and then she struck her final pose. The moment the music died, the stadium detonated. A sea of people rose to their feet. The sound of their applause was a physical force, a tidal wave crashing over the ice. Some fans were already pounding their hands together high above their heads. Others could only gaze, mouths agape, at the impossible thing they had just witnessed. But the truest story was told on the faces of the judges, who had tracked every move with hawk-like intensity, calculating, comparing, scrutinizing. And they understood what the audience was just beginning to grasp. This score was about to rewrite the entire competition. Yet even before the digits flashed onto the massive screen, a deeper truth had already been forged. Alisa Lou hadn't just executed a perfect Olympic program. She had achieved something far more elusive. She had taken one of the most punishing crucibles in all of sports and made it look like a beautiful, effortless dream. And a performance of that magnitude has the power to decide a championship long before the final results are ever officially posted. For a handful of seconds after the music faded, Alisa Lou was an island of stillness at the center of the rink. The thunderous applause was still ricocheting through the vast arena, echoing from the high arched ceilings of the Milan Olympic Stadium. Countless spectators remained standing, their hands still moving while others just watched in silent reverence. But Alisa herself appeared preternaturally composed once more. Not ecstatic, not dazed, but simply present, waiting. In the world of figure skating, a strange, suspended quiet always follows the storm of a performance. The skater glides off the ice to sit with their coach in a small, exposed alcove as the judges render their final verdict. For many, it is the most agonizing part of the entire event. The surge of adrenaline begins to recede, and the mind starts its ruthless playback of every detail, every leap. Was that rotation truly complete? Did I lose momentum on that landing? Did they catch that tiny correction I made coming out of the spin? At this moment, most skaters are statues of tension beside their coaches, their gaze locked desperately onto the blank scoreboard. But Alisa Lou was different, leaning forward slightly, her breathing even, wearing a look of such placid relaxation it felt utterly alien to the setting. More than anything, she seemed intrigued. The camera zoomed in for a close-up. Her coach murmured something at her side, gesturing once back toward the ice where the officials were finalizing their complex arithmetic. Then, a subtle shift in the arena's lighting signaled that the scoreboard was about to come to life with the final results. A low, expectant hum swept through the stands. Every soul in the building knew this single score would crown the new Olympic champion. One after another, the numbers materialized. First, the technical score, then the program components, and finally, the total. For one breathtaking instant, absolute silence reigned. It was the unique silence created when thousands of people processed the same monumental number in the same moment. And then the arena shattered into a deafening roar, because the final tally propelled Alisa Lou to the pinnacle of the leaderboard to Olympic gold. For 24 years, the Olympic figure skating crown had eluded an American woman. That long, haunting drought, a shadow over U.S. skating since 2002, had just been broken. When the camera found Alisa, her reaction was a study in pure composure. She simply smiled. There was no dramatic collapse, no theatrical fall to the ice that so often punctuates these monumental victories. No flood of tears, just a radiant, authentic grin, followed by a soft, incredulous laugh, as if the sheer magnitude of the moment was just beginning to dawn on her. Amidst a rising crescendo of applause, her coach pulled her into an embrace. But what made this victory legendary wasn't merely the medal hanging around her neck. It was the way she had seized it. Modern figure skating had long been an escalating arms race of pure technicality. The entire sport was a relentless push for more rotations, for ever higher difficulty, for ever greater risk. Quadruple jumps ruled the headlines, the brutal centerpieces around which entire programs were built. But on that night, Alisa Lou chose a radically different kind of rebellion. She turned away from the high-stakes gamble of the most dangerous jumps, choosing instead to channel her soul into something else entirely. Flawless execution, a seamless flow, an undeniable bond with her music. She delivered 7 pristine triple jumps, each one a statement of precision, not recklessness. While the judges rewarded this profound balance, the thunderous response from the audience told the real story. What people would carry with them was not the technical data. It was the feeling she had given them. Alisa Lou had skated with an unmistakable, infectious joy. In a world suffocated by pressure, that singular difference felt like a revolution. Commentators, reaching for words, began to describe her performance in the simplest, most powerful terms: freedom, joy, confidence. These were not the words typically used to narrate the crushing tension of an Olympic final. But her story was far from over. In the weeks after the Games, an extraordinary ripple effect began to manifest online. Athletes from completely different worlds started to invoke Alisa Lou's name, speaking of how her journey had reawakened their own original love for their sport. Others told stories of being inspired to return to passions they had abandoned years before. An informal but powerful name began to circulate among journalists: the Alisa Lou effect. It was a revolutionary idea. The idea that authentic artistry could be just as powerful as brute force.